Goldie's name suited her perfectly, and at 32, she owned an art gallery that showcased emerging artists in downtown Chicago. But 24 years ago, she was just an 8-year-old girl watching her family splinter into pieces. Her dad took her brother, her mom took her sister, and nobody took her. After 2 decades of silence, they all suddenly wanted back into her life, expecting the same desperate child they had abandoned. But that little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built herself from the ground up. Before she shares her story, let viewers know where they're watching from in the comments. And be sure to subscribe if stories about overcoming abandonment resonate with you, because trust me, this journey gets intense. Before everything fell apart, they were what most people would consider a normal family. They lived in a brick ranch house in suburban Chicago, complete with a tire swing in the backyard that Goldie's dad had hung from the massive oak tree. She could still picture the way the evening sun filtered through the leaves, creating dancing shadows across their small patch of lawn, where their golden retriever, Rusty, would chase them in endless circles until they all collapsed in giggling heaps. Goldie's dad, Jack, worked as a construction contractor. He was tall with broad shoulders and hands rough from years of manual labor. He smelled like sawdust and mint gum, a combination Goldie found comforting whenever he'd scoop her up for a hug. Her mom, Diane, worked part-time as a nurse at the local hospital. She had this infectious laugh that would start soft and build until her whole body shook with it. Her dark blonde hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, but she'd let Goldie brush it out at night, sometimes counting 100 strokes, just like princesses in storybooks. Goldie's brother Noah was 2 years older than her, 10, when everything changed. He was her protector, the one who taught her to ride a bike by running alongside until she found her balance, then cheering wildly when she finally pedaled on her own. He collected baseball cards and knew all the statistics, information he'd recite to her, even though she rarely understood the significance. What she did understand was the pride in his voice when he explained it. Sophie was Goldie's little sister, just 6 when their family fractured. She had wispy blonde curls and a habit of following Goldie everywhere. Goldie read her bedtime stories, making different voices for each character until Sophie drifted off to sleep. Sophie had a stuffed elephant named Ellie that went everywhere with her, one ear loved thin from constant handling. Their home wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Goldie's bedroom had glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling, a galaxy she'd stare at while falling asleep. The kitchen had yellow curtains her mom had sewn herself, and mismatched chairs around the dining table that Dad had rescued from various construction sites and refinished. Sundays were for pancakes. Dad would be at the stove flipping perfect golden circles while Mom sliced fruit. Noah would sneak chocolate chips into the batter when Dad wasn't looking, and Sophie would giggle as she watched him, her co-conspirator. Goldie was in charge of setting the table carefully, placing each fork and knife, feeling so grown up with her responsibilities. Summer meant trips to Lake Michigan, where they'd spend entire days building sand castles that Sophie would decorate with seashells and feathers. Mom would read paperback novels under an umbrella, while Dad taught Noah and Goldie to swim past the breaking waves. Those nights, exhausted and sun-kissed, they'd get ice cream cones that dripped down their wrists as they watched the sunset paint the sky in watercolor pinks and purples. When Goldie turned 8, Mom threw her a birthday party with a rainbow cake and balloons tied to every chair. Her friends from school came over, and they played freeze tag in the backyard until dusk. Dad set up a sprinkler for them to run through, and Mom took pictures with her old film camera, carefully documenting every moment. Goldie remembered feeling so special, so loved, completely unaware that this would be their last celebration as an intact family. Looking back, there were small signs of trouble she was too young to recognize. The way Dad's work seemed to fluctuate some months, bringing home plenty, while others meant quiet conversations behind closed doors. Mom's increasing frustration with their financial instability, the tight smile she'd wear when bills arrived in the mail. But children don't typically notice these things unless they become impossible to ignore. For a long time, their home felt secure, warm, filled with the ordinary magic of family life. Game nights where Dad would dramatically accuse Mom of cheating at Monopoly. Weeknight dinners around the table where they each had to share the best part of their day. The way Mom would kiss each of their foreheads before school, leaving the faintest smell of her flowery perfume. All these small moments formed the foundation of Goldie's world, one she believed was as solid as the brick walls of their house. She didn't know then that foundations can crack, that homes built on love can still collapse. She couldn't have imagined a future where the five of them would become strangers, or that she would be the one left behind when everyone else moved on. The memories of that time are both precious and painful, a reminder of everything she lost and everything she had to rebuild on her own. The first real crack in their family's foundation appeared when Dad lost a major construction contract he'd been counting on. Goldie remembered the night. He came home hours later than usual, his face gray with defeat. Mom sent the kids to play in the basement, but their voices carried down the stairs as they had their first serious fight Goldie had ever witnessed. "How could you have banked everything on this one job, Jack?" Mom's voice was sharp, accusatory in a way Goldie had never heard before. "It was a sure thing, Diane. How was I supposed to know they'd go with another company at the last minute?" Dad's voice boomed back, defensive and raw. That night, Goldie heard Mom crying in their bedroom. The soft hiccuping sobs she tried to muffle with a pillow. Dad slept on the couch, and breakfast the next morning was a silent affair, tension thick enough to touch. In the weeks that followed, Mom started taking extra nursing shifts. She'd leave before they woke up, and sometimes return after they were in bed. Her absence created a hollow space in their daily routines. No one was there to help with homework or listen to stories about their school day. Dad tried to fill both roles, but he was distracted, constantly on the phone trying to secure new contracts while bills piled up on the kitchen counter. One night, Goldie got up for a glass of water and overheard Dad on the phone in the kitchen. "I don't know how we're going to make the mortgage this month," he whispered harshly. "The savings are gone, and Diane's extra shifts barely cover the utilities." The fear in his voice made Goldie's stomach twist into knots. Noah withdrew into himself, spending more time in his room with the door closed. He stopped inviting friends over and quit his baseball team, claiming he just wasn't interested anymore. But Goldie caught him staring at his glove sometimes, fingers running over the worn leather with longing. Sophie started having nightmares, waking up screaming about monsters under her bed. Goldie would crawl in beside her, stroking her hair until she fell back asleep, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed anymore. Their parents were too wrapped up in their own struggles to notice how they were all reacting to the changing atmosphere of their home. Christmas that year was a shadow of previous celebrations. No tree, no presents, just a small dinner Mom prepared between shifts, during which their parents barely spoke to each other. Noah picked at his food, while Sophie asked repeatedly when Santa was coming. Questions their parents deflected until she finally stopped asking. In January, Goldie's grandparents visited. She overheard them talking to her parents in hushed, concerned tones. They offered help, though she didn't understand exactly what kind. Whatever it was, her parents refused, her father's pride still intact despite everything else crumbling around them. "We'll figure this out ourselves," he insisted, while Goldie's grandmother's face creased with worry. Dad started drinking more heavily. Not every night, but often enough that the recycling bin filled with empty beer cans faster than before. He'd fall asleep watching television, sometimes not making it to bed at all. Mom became emotionally distant, going through the motions of caregiving without the warmth that once characterized her interactions with them. Mornings became Goldie's responsibility. She'd get up early to make cereal for Sophie and Noah when their parents slept in or had already left for work. At 8 years old, she became the keeper of routines, making sure teeth were brushed and backpacks were ready for school. She'd walk Sophie to her classroom, promising to meet her after school, taking on a role no child should have to assume. One afternoon, Goldie came home early from a friend's house and heard Mom on the phone in her bedroom. The door was cracked open, and through it, she could see her sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand rubbing her forehead as if warding off a headache. "I don't know what our options are anymore, Lisa," she was saying to Goldie's aunt. "The kids. I can't give them the life they deserve like this." There was a pause. "We've talked about separation, but what happens to the children then? Who goes where?" The cold dread that washed over Goldie at those words still haunts her. Who goes where? As if they were furniture to be divided up in a divorce. The fighting escalated. One night, it got so bad that Dad punched a hole in the living room wall. Goldie watched from the staircase, frozen in fear as Mom screamed that he was out of control. Noah pulled her back to her room, where Sophie was already hiding under her blankets. The three of them huddled together on Goldie's bed, Noah's arm protectively around both of them as they listened to the sounds of their family imploding. Later that week, Goldie found Mom crying alone in the bathroom. The door wasn't fully closed, and through the crack, she could see her sitting on the closed toilet lid, shoulders shaking silently. Goldie wanted to go to her, to offer the same comfort she gave Sophie after her nightmares. But something held her back. Maybe it was the realization that some hurts were too big for a child to fix. Goldie started creating distraction games for her siblings. They'd build elaborate forts in the basement using old sheets and furniture. She'd invent scavenger hunts around the house and yard. Anything to shield them from the reality of their disintegrating home life, to give them moments of normal childhood in the midst of chaos. But she couldn't distract herself from the truth. Something irreparable had broken between their parents. Dad moved into the basement guest room. The separation within their house felt like a prelude to something worse. Goldie would lie awake at night listening for sounds of reconciliation that never came, imagining scenarios where they'd work things out and they'd return to the family they'd been before. The day Goldie found divorce papers in Mom's purse was the day hope died. She wasn't snooping intentionally, just looking for gum. But there they were, official-looking documents with terms like dissolution of marriage and custody arrangement. She didn't understand all the legal language, but she understood enough. This wasn't temporary. This was the end. That evening, after they were supposed to be in bed, Goldie sat at the top of the stairs and listened to her parents discussing which child would go where. The casual way they divided them up still makes her blood run cold when she thinks about it. Noah should come with me, Dad said. He needs a male influence at his age. Fine, but Sophie stays with me, Mom replied. She's too young to be without her mother. Goldie waited, breath held, for one of them to mention her, to fight for her, to claim her as Noah and Sophie had been claimed. But the conversation moved on to financial arrangements and visitation schedules, and her name never came up. It was as if she didn't exist, as if she were invisible to the very people who gave her life. That night, Goldie cried silently into her pillow, careful not to wake Sophie, who'd climbed into her bed again. She was facing the first devastating realization of her young life. In the redistribution of their family, there was no place set aside for her. The morning everything changed forever started like any other. Goldie woke up early, as had become her habit, and went downstairs to make breakfast. She found Dad and Noah in the living room, suitcases packed beside them. Dad was kneeling in front of Noah, hands on his shoulders, speaking in a low, serious voice. "We're going on a trip," Dad explained when he noticed Goldie standing in the doorway. "Noah and I need some time away to figure things out." Noah looked confused, his eyes red-rimmed as if he'd been crying. When he hugged Goldie goodbye, he whispered, "I'll call you soon, I promise," his voice wobbling with uncertainty. She clung to him, somehow knowing this wasn't a normal trip, that something more permanent was happening. Dad barely looked at her as they left. Just a quick, "Be good for your mom, Goldie," before ushering Noah out to the car where she noticed several garbage bags filled with what looked like clothes and toys. Not luggage for a trip, belongings for a move. After they drove away, Mom locked herself in her bedroom and wouldn't come out. Goldie heard her sobbing through the door, but her knocks went unanswered. Sophie kept asking where Dad and Noah had gone, and Goldie didn't know what to tell her. They ate cereal for dinner that night, and Goldie read Sophie 3 extra stories at bedtime, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Mom remained in her room the next day. Goldie made peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, helped Sophie brush her teeth, and tried calling Dad's cell phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail every time. That night, Sophie and Goldie slept together in her bed again. Sophie's small body curled against hers for comfort they both desperately needed. On the third day, Mom emerged from her bedroom, looking hollow-eyed and determined. She moved around the house with robotic efficiency, pulling out suitcases and filling them with Sophie's clothes and toys. When Goldie asked what she was doing, she paused only briefly. "Sophie and I need a fresh start," she said, not meeting Goldie's eyes. "We're going to stay with Aunt Lisa for a while." "What about me?" Goldie asked, panic rising in her chest. "When are we coming back home?" Mom's expression flickered between guilt and resolve. "You'll stay here for now. We'll come back for you when things settle down. I promise." Goldie didn't believe her. But she was 8 years old and powerless to stop what was happening. Sophie cried when she realized Goldie wasn't coming, reaching for her from Mom's arms as they headed to the car. "Why can't Goldie come?" she wailed, her face red and tear-streaked. "Goldie needs to stay here in case your father comes back," Mom answered, a lie Goldie recognized even then. "We'll be together again soon." Then they were gone, and Goldie was alone in their house. Completely alone at 8 years old. The first day by herself, Goldie pretended it was an adventure. She ate ice cream for breakfast because there was no one to tell her not to. She watched television shows Mom never allowed. She jumped on her parents' bed, but the freedom quickly gave way to fear as darkness fell, and the house made strange noises she'd never noticed before. She slept with all the lights on that night, Rusty curled protectively at her feet. The next morning, Goldie realized no one had fed him. So she poured an entire box of cereal into his bowl, not knowing how much he needed, but wanting to make sure he had enough. By the third day alone, the food situation was becoming dire. She'd exhausted the easy options like cereal and peanut butter sandwiches. The milk had gone sour. She didn't know how to cook anything requiring the stove or oven. Rusty and she shared crackers and cheese slices from the refrigerator. Goldie kept calling Dad's phone and now Mom's too, but neither answered. She left tearful messages asking when they were coming back for her, begging not to be left alone anymore. The silence in response was deafening. On the fourth day, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Garcia from next door stood there with a concerned expression. She noticed Goldie was home alone and wanted to check if everything was okay. Goldie lied, saying her mom had just gone to the store and would be back soon. But Mrs. Garcia saw through the lie, especially when Rusty bounded up behind her, clearly unfed and unwalked. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" she asked gently. Goldie broke down then, telling her everything through gulping sobs. How Dad took Noah, Mom took Sophie, and nobody took her. How they promised to come back, but hadn't called. How she was running out of food and was scared at night. Mrs. Garcia's face transformed from concern to horror as Goldie spoke. She brought her to her house, fed her a proper meal, and called the authorities. By that evening, a social worker named Miss Judy Reynolds was sitting across from Goldie in Mrs. Garcia's living room, asking questions she didn't have answers to. "Do you know where your parents went? Phone numbers? Do you have grandparents or other relatives nearby? None close enough. How long have you been alone?" "For days." Miss Reynolds had a soft voice but couldn't hide the pity in her eyes. That pity would become a familiar expression on the faces of adults in Goldie's life for years to come. She explained that Goldie would need to go with her, that she couldn't stay in the empty house, that they would try to contact her parents. She let Goldie pack a small bag of clothes and take her stuffed bear Howard that she'd had since she was a baby. Rusty went to the animal shelter, another loss in a week full of them. The family court hearing a week later was cold and sterile, full of adults talking about Goldie as if she weren't there. Neither of her parents appeared, though they'd apparently been notified. The judge, an older man with kind eyes but a stern mouth, declared her a ward of the state. Just like that, in less than 2 weeks, she went from being part of a family to being a case number in the foster care system. Goldie's first placement was with the Thompsons, a couple with 3 biological children who took in foster kids for the supplemental income. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. She slept on a pull-out couch in their basement family room. Her belongings, what few she had, were kept in a black garbage bag since there was no dresser or closet space for her. Their children regarded her with suspicion, never including her in their games or conversations. She wrote letters to Noah and Sophie, pouring her heart onto paper, telling them she missed them and asking when they would see each other again. She addressed them to Aunt Lisa's house, the only place she could think her mom and Sophie might be. They came back weeks later, marked, "Return to sender," no forwarding address. Once, Goldie managed to call her dad's cell phone when Mrs. Thompson wasn't paying attention. A woman answered, her voice sharp with annoyance when Goldie asked for her father. "He can't come to the phone," she said. "Who is this?" "It's Goldie, his daughter," she replied, hope surging that she'd finally made contact. There was a pause. "I'll tell him you called," before the line went dead. He never called back. Goldie left messages at Aunt Lisa's house too, calling when she knew Mrs. Thompson was occupied with her own children. Her aunt's responses were vague and uncomfortable. "Your mom is going through a lot right now," or "they'll reach out when they're ready." Never a direct connection, never answers to her questions about when they were coming back for her. Gradually, Goldie learned that both her parents had moved out of state. Dad had taken Noah to Wisconsin, where he'd found work on a large commercial project. Mom and Sophie were in Indiana with Aunt Lisa, supposedly until Mom could get on her feet. Neither had left contact information with the foster care agency. Neither had attended any of the court hearings about her custody. Neither seemed concerned about what had happened to her after they drove away. 6 months into her time with the Thompsons, a birthday card arrived for Goldie from Noah. It had been forwarded multiple times and was weeks late. Inside was a store-bought card with a brief message. "Happy birthday, Goldie. Miss you, Noah." No return address, no phone number, just confirmation that he was alive and remembered her. She slept with that card under her pillow until it fell apart from handling. Mrs. Thompson found Goldie crying over the tattered remains of the card one evening. She sat beside her on the pull-out couch, awkwardly patting her back. "Sometimes families just can't stay together," she said, probably trying to be kind but missing the mark entirely. "But you're safe here, and that's what matters." But Goldie wasn't safe. Not really. Because a month later, the Thompsons decided they wanted to focus on their biological children. And just like that, she was packing her garbage bag again, moving to a new temporary home with strangers who didn't want her either. Goldie's second placement was with the Ramirez family, who already housed 5 other foster children in a cramped 3-bedroom house. Mr. Ramirez was strict to the point of militaristic, enforcing rules about everything from bathroom schedules to the exact amount of time they were allowed to spend on homework. Mrs. Ramirez was largely indifferent, going through the motions of care without any emotional investment. Goldie shared a bunk bed with 2 other girls in a room designed for 1 child. Her space consisted of 1/3 of a dresser and a plastic bin under the bed where she kept her few personal items, which now included Noah's birthday card preserved between 2 pieces of clear packing tape to prevent further deterioration. Changing schools mid-year made it difficult to make friends. Goldie was the new girl, the foster kid with secondhand clothes and no parents to attend school functions. She became quiet, keeping to herself and focusing on schoolwork as an escape from the chaotic foster home. Teachers largely ignored her since she didn't cause trouble, and the other students learned quickly that she wouldn't share details about her home situation, eventually losing interest in the novelty of her presence. One of the older foster boys, Damon, made a habit of stealing from the younger kids. He took the bracelet Mrs. Garcia had given Goldie before she left, the only gift she'd received since being in the system. When she confronted him, he threatened to tell the Ramirezes she'd been breaking house rules if she reported him. Goldie learned then another harsh lesson in the foster system. Sometimes you have to choose which losses you can live with. Social workers came and went with alarming frequency. Each new one knew less about her case than the last, reading from a file that contained the basic facts, but none of the emotional context of her abandonment. They'd ask standard questions about her physical well-being, whether she was attending school regularly, if she had any concerns about her placement. Goldie learned to say what they wanted to hear, knowing that complaining rarely led to improvements and often resulted in more disruption. During one visit, a particularly rushed social worker mentioned casually that they'd received an update about her siblings. Noah was playing baseball in a Wisconsin Little League and doing well in school. Sophie had adjusted to her new life in Indiana and was taking dance classes. They were thriving while Goldie was surviving, and the contrast was a bitter pill to swallow. After 8 months with the Ramirezes, Goldie was moved again, this time to the Williams family. On the surface, they seemed perfect, a tidy suburban home. Mrs. Williams who baked cookies for after-school snacks, Mr. Williams who coached Little League. For the first time, she had her own room with an actual bed, dresser, and desk. She dared to hope this might be different. But appearances can be deceiving. Mrs. Williams' warm homemaker persona disappeared behind closed doors, replaced by cutting remarks and impossible standards. Nothing Goldie did was ever good enough. Her grades, despite being mostly A's, could be higher. Her chores were never completed to her satisfaction. Her appearance was constantly critiqued, from her hair, "Why can't you make it look neat?" to her posture, "Stand up straight. You're not a hunchback." The verbal abuse was constant but careful, never crossing lines that would trigger mandatory reporting if she mentioned it to her social worker. "You're so lazy. No wonder your parents didn't want you," she'd say while smiling at Mr. Williams. Or, "If you were my real daughter, I'd be embarrassed to take you anywhere," while driving her to school. Goldie learned to become invisible in that house, to speak only when spoken to anticipate needs before they were expressed. She developed insomnia, lying awake planning how to avoid criticism the next day. Her school performance began to suffer as exhaustion took its toll, giving Mrs. Williams more ammunition for her verbal attacks. After a year with the Williams family, Goldie was moved to what would become her worst placement, the Jackson house. Mr. Jackson was rarely home, working night shifts at a factory. Mrs. Jackson collected foster kids for the checks, spending the money on herself while keeping them on strict food rations. Meals were monitored, snacks forbidden, and food was regularly withheld as punishment for perceived misbehavior. At 14, hungry and desperate, Goldie ran away. She spent 3 days living in a park, sleeping on benches, and stealing food from grocery stores before police found her and returned her to the foster care system. The Jacksons didn't want her back after her stunt, so she entered yet another temporary home while waiting for a more permanent placement. It was during this transition period that her high school counselor, Miss Rivera, noticed something in Goldie that she'd long stopped seeing in herself: potential. Despite her spotty attendance and inconsistent performance, her standardized test scores were exceptional. Miss Rivera began advocating for her, suggesting advanced placement classes and connecting her with school resources she hadn't known existed. "You're smart, Goldie," she told her during one of their weekly meetings. "Really smart. And that brain of yours is your ticket out of the situation you're in." Goldie's new placement was with Miss Harriet, an older single woman who had fostered dozens of teenagers over the years. She was neither overly affectionate nor coldly distant, instead offering clear boundaries and consistent expectations. Her house was modest but comfortable, with bookshelves lining nearly every wall. "I don't expect you to call me Mom," she said on Goldie's first night there. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. But while you're here, you'll have stability, respect, and opportunities. What you make of them is up to you." For the first time in years, Goldie experienced genuine stability. Miss Harriet maintained the same routines day after day. Dinner at 6 o'clock, homework until 8, reading time until 9:30, lights out at 10 o'clock. She checked Goldie's assignments not to criticize, but to offer help if needed. She attended parent-teacher conferences and advocated for her when teachers underestimated her abilities. Goldie discovered solace in art during those years with Miss Harriet. She noticed her doodling constantly and bought her proper sketch pads and pencils. Goldie spent hours in her room drawing, expressing on paper the emotions she couldn't verbalize. Miss Harriet never pried, but she did hang her better pieces in the hallway, a quiet acknowledgement of her talent. By her junior year of high school, Miss Rivera and Miss Harriet were both encouraging Goldie to consider college, something that had seemed impossible before. They helped her research scholarships for foster youth and guided her through application essays. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the system that had defined her adolescence. Then, during her senior year, Miss Harriet received a diagnosis of terminal cancer. She told Goldie directly, without drama or excessive emotion. "I have 6 months, maybe less," she said over their regular Sunday breakfast. "I've updated my will and spoken to your social worker. You'll need a new placement to finish out the school year." Goldie was 17, less than a year away from aging out of the system anyway. The thought of another move, another adjustment, was exhausting. But more than that, she was facing the loss of the only adult who had consistently shown up for her in nearly a decade. Miss Harriet declined quickly. Within 3 months, she was in hospice care, and Goldie was back in a temporary placement, this time with a couple who fostered mainly for religious reasons and tried daily to convert her to their particular brand of faith. Goldie visited Miss Harriet every day after school until she passed, holding her hand and reading aloud from her favorite books. Her funeral was small but dignified, attended mainly by former foster kids whose lives she had touched. They were a motley crew of different ages, backgrounds, and life outcomes, united by their experience in her home. It was the first time since her family's abandonment that Goldie felt genuine grief, a measure of how rare meaningful connections had become in her life. 2 months later, Goldie turned 18 and aged out of the foster care system. She had a high school diploma, acceptance to community college based on scholarships for former foster youth, and $752 in savings from part-time jobs. She had no family to call, no home to return to, and no safety net if she failed. With her meager savings, Goldie secured a spot in a shared apartment with 3 other girls, all students at different colleges around Chicago. The apartment was small, the neighborhood questionable, but it was the first space that felt truly hers, even if she was only renting one corner of it. She enrolled in community college while working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a local diner and evenings at a retail store in the mall. Between working and classes, she averaged 5 hours of sleep a night, but the exhaustion felt purposeful, different from the bone-deep weariness of her years in foster care. This tiredness came with paychecks, with credits accumulating toward a degree, with forward momentum. During her second semester, Goldie enrolled in an art history class as an elective. The professor, Dr. Mason, noticed her drawings in the margins of her notes and asked to see more of her work. Reluctantly, she showed him her sketchbook, expecting the kind of vague encouragement adults often offer children to be polite. Instead, he was genuinely impressed. "You have a natural understanding of composition and light," he said, flipping through pages of portraits and landscapes she'd created. "Have you considered pursuing art seriously?" The thought had never crossed Goldie's mind. Art had been her escape, her therapy, never a potential career. But Dr. Mason's interest sparked something. He connected her with the college's art department, helped her apply for a specific scholarship for fine art students, and mentored her through building a proper portfolio. By the end of her second year at community college, Goldie had secured a full scholarship to complete her bachelor's degree at the state university. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel genuine pride in her accomplishments, to recognize that she'd created opportunities for herself despite starting with nothing. Moving into university housing introduced Goldie to Zoe, who would become her first real best friend since childhood. She was studying business, practical and ambitious, but with a creativity that complemented Goldie's more artistic tendencies. They stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, the kind of easy friendship she'd observed others having but never experienced herself. "You never talk about your family," Zoe noted one night as they shared a pizza in their dorm room. "Don't have one," Goldie replied, the practiced casualness of years smoothing over the pain of the admission. Zoe didn't push, didn't offer empty sympathy. She just nodded and said, "Well, you can share mine for holidays if you want. My mom always cooks enough for an army anyway." That simple offer of inclusion meant more than she could know. For the next 3 years, Goldie spent Thanksgivings and Christmases with Zoe's boisterous family, watching their easy affection with each other, learning what healthy family dynamics looked like. It was both healing and painful, a glimpse of what she had missed, but also what was possible. During her junior year, Goldie secured a work-study position at the campus gallery, assisting with exhibition installations and administrative tasks. She discovered she had a talent not just for creating art, but for curating it, for understanding how pieces work together to tell a cohesive story. She found herself drawn to the business side as much as the creative aspects, fascinated by the intersection of art and commerce. That same year, she met James in an advanced painting class. He was thoughtful and patient, never pushing for more information than she was ready to give about her past. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared interests. He was the first person she told the full story of her abandonment to. Sitting on his apartment floor at 3 o'clock in the morning, words spilling out after years of careful containment. "I kept waiting for you to have trust issues," he said when she'd finished. Goldie laughed through tears. "What do you think this is? I've known you for 8 months, and I'm just now telling you why I never talk about my childhood." He smiled, pushing her hair back from her face. "Fair point. But you're here. You're letting me in. That takes incredible courage after what you've been through." James helped Goldie see that her defensive walls, while necessary for survival, were also preventing her from fully experiencing life. With his encouragement, she began therapy through the University Counseling Center, finally addressing the abandonment trauma she'd carried alone for so long. Graduation came with bittersweet triumph. Goldie received her diploma with honors, walked across the stage to the cheers of Zoe and James, but felt the absence of family acutely. No parents beaming with pride, no siblings waving enthusiastically from the audience. Even after all those years, there was still a hollow space where those connections should have been. After graduation, Goldie leveraged her gallery experience into an assistant position at a small contemporary art space in Chicago. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was in her field, a foot in the door of the art world. She shared an apartment with Zoe, who'd secured an entry-level marketing job and continued her therapy sessions, determined to build a healthier relationship with her past. Her career progressed steadily. Within 2 years, she was promoted to associate curator, responsible for discovering new artists and conceptualizing exhibitions. The gallery director recognized her eye for emerging talent and her ability to communicate with artists effectively, skills that set her apart from her peers. But personal growth wasn't as straightforward as professional advancement. One day, walking down Michigan Avenue, Goldie spotted a man who resembled her father. Same build, same gait, same way of tilting his head while waiting to cross the street. The panic attack hit without warning, leaving her gasping for breath on a busy sidewalk, disoriented and suddenly 8 years old again, watching him drive away with her brother. That incident sent her back to therapy with renewed commitment. She needed to address not just the abandonment itself, but the ongoing impact it had on her daily life, the way it colored her relationships and self-perception. She began to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, one she would likely be engaged in for the rest of her life. During this time, Goldie cultivated a close circle of friends who became the family she chose for herself. Besides Zoe, there was Marcus, a chef who hosted elaborate dinner parties in his tiny apartment. Elena, a librarian with an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure facts. And David, a software developer with a dry wit that never failed to make her laugh. They created their own traditions and support systems, showing up for each other in ways her biological family never had. They had weekend brunches where they discussed their victories and failures over mimosas, holiday gatherings where they each contributed dishes that represented their diverse backgrounds, movie nights, game tournaments, impromptu dance parties in living rooms too small to accommodate their enthusiasm. These rituals replaced the family traditions she'd lost, creating new memories to overlay the painful ones. After 3 years of saving every spare dollar, Goldie took the leap and opened her own small gallery. The space was modest, a former bookstore in a neighborhood on the edge of gentrification, but it was hers. She focused on showcasing local artists who might otherwise struggle to find representation, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds similar to her own. The gallery's success exceeded her expectations. Art critics praised her fresh eye and uncanny ability to spot talent before it broke. Local publications featured the space in cultural guides to the city. Artists sought her out, trusting that she would represent their work with integrity and understanding. By 29, Goldie had enough financial stability to buy her first condo, a one-bedroom in a converted warehouse with high ceilings, perfect for displaying the art she'd begun collecting. The day she signed the mortgage papers, she sat alone in the empty space, keys in hand, and wept, not from sadness, but from a profound realization that she had created security for herself. After years of temporary homes and borrowed spaces, she had tangible proof that she could provide what her parents had failed to give her. Her relationship with Michael began during this period of stability and success. He was an architect who came to one of her gallery openings, more interested in the building's features than the art, until she caught him studying a particularly challenging installation with genuine curiosity. Unlike James, who had helped her begin her healing journey but ultimately wanted more emotional openness than she could offer, Michael understood boundaries. Having lost his own mother at a young age, he recognized the particular resilience that comes from navigating significant early loss. "We're both building our lives from scratch," he observed on their third date. "There's something beautiful about that. Creating exactly what you want without the weight of expectations." For years, Goldie had conducted periodic searches for her family online, looking up Noah and Sophie's names, checking social media for any trace of her parents. These searches became less frequent as she built her own life, the desperate need to reconnect gradually replaced by curiosity, then by something approaching indifference. She made a conscious decision to stop searching, to focus on the present and future rather than a past she couldn't change. She found peace in accepting that family could be chosen, that blood ties were only one type of connection. The people who showed up for her gallery openings, who helped her move into her condo, who remembered her birthday without reminders, who held her when old griefs surfaced unexpectedly. These were her real family. They had earned that designation through consistent presence and care, not through genetic obligation. By her early 30s, Goldie had created a life that felt whole and meaningful. She ran a successful gallery, owned her home, maintained loving friendships, and had a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. The abandoned 8-year-old was still part of her, but she no longer defined her. Goldie had become someone that little girl could be proud of, someone who had transformed abandonment into independence, rejection into self-reliance, loss into creativity. She thought she had made peace with her past. Then Noah found her on Facebook, and everything she thought she'd resolved came rushing back with devastating clarity. The message arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Goldie was in her office at the gallery, coffee in hand, reviewing submissions from artists for an upcoming exhibition. The notification pinged and she clicked it absently, expecting a message from a client or colleague. Instead, she found herself staring at a name she hadn't seen in 20 years, Noah Winters. The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, hot liquid splashing her ankles. She barely noticed. Her entire focus narrowed to the small rectangle of text on her screen. Goldie, it's Noah, your brother. I don't know if you remember me, but I've been looking for you for years. I just found your gallery website. Can we talk, please? She stared at the message for so long that her assistant came to check on her, concerned by the crash and subsequent silence. She helped clean up the spilled coffee while Goldie sat immobile, unable to process the sudden intrusion of her past into her carefully constructed present. It took 2 days for her to respond. 2 days of discussing the situation with her therapist, with Michael, with Zoe. 2 days of weighing the potential benefits of reconnection against the certain disruption it would cause in her life. Her response was brief. I remember you. We can talk. Noah responded immediately with his phone number. When she called, his voice was deeper than she remembered, but with the same cadence, the same slight hesitation before important words. I can't believe I found you, he said, emotion making his voice thick. I've been searching on and off for years. Why now? Goldie asked, the question that had been burning in her since his message arrived. The story unfolded gradually over that call and several that followed. Noah was married now, with 2 children. He'd built a life as an engineer in Wisconsin, not far from where their father had initially taken him. He'd searched for her sporadically over the years, but with limited information, the efforts had gone nowhere. Dad didn't want us to contact you at first, he explained. Said it would be confusing for everyone, that clean breaks were better. By the time I was old enough to make my own decisions, I didn't know where to start looking. It was during a recent family health scare that Noah had renewed his efforts to find her, diving deeper into online searches until he discovered her gallery website with a professional biography that confirmed she was the sister he'd been seeking. Sophie's been looking for you, too, he added, dropping another bombshell. She never stopped talking about you, even when we were all supposed to pretend the past didn't happen. Piece by piece, Goldie learned what had happened to her family after they drove away and left her behind. Dad's construction business eventually stabilized in Wisconsin, though he never achieved the success he'd dreamed of. He'd remarried briefly when Noah was in high school, a relationship that ended when his drinking became problematic. He was single now, in his early 60s with developing health problems, living in a small apartment in Milwaukee. Mom had stayed with Aunt Lisa in Indiana for only a few months before moving to Ohio with Sophie for a fresh start. She'd remarried when Sophie was 10, a stable, kind man who'd been a good stepfather by all accounts. She still worked as a nurse, now in management at a hospital. According to Noah, she expressed regret over how things happened with Goldie, though she'd never made concrete efforts to find her or make amends. Sophie had become a teacher, working with elementary school children. She'd been engaged twice, but never married, breaking off both relationships before reaching the altar. She lived in Columbus, within an hour of their mother, but maintaining what Noah described as healthy boundaries with her. There's going to be a family reunion, Noah said during their 4th call. Dad's turning 60, and it seems like the health scare made everyone realize time isn't infinite. They all want you to come. They all want me to come, Goldie repeated, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. The same people who left her alone in an empty house when she was 8 years old. Noah's discomfort was palpable, even through the phone. It was a terrible time for everyone, Goldie. Dad was barely functioning. Mom was having what we now know was a major depressive episode. They made horrible decisions, but they've changed. And you think that excuses abandoning a child? She asked, anger finally breaking through the shock that had dominated her reactions thus far. No, of course not, he backpedaled. Nothing excuses that. But people can regret their worst mistakes, right? They want a chance to apologize, to try to make things right. Goldie laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Make things right. I spent 10 years in the foster system, Noah. Do you have any idea what that was like? He didn't, of course. How could he? While she was moving from home to home, belongings in garbage bags, he was living with their father, playing baseball, having a normal adolescence despite the family fracture. Goldie found herself in an uncomfortable position as messenger between parts of her family who hadn't communicated directly in years. Noah spoke with Sophie regularly, but had limited contact with their parents. Sophie talked to their mother weekly, but rarely engaged with their father. Everyone, it seemed, had complicated relationships with each other but were united in their sudden desire to reconnect with her. Sophie called a week after Noah's initial contact. Her voice was both familiar and strange, the little girl's high pitch replaced by a woman's tones, but with the same emotional openness Goldie remembered. I never forgot you, she said, crying within minutes of their conversation beginning. I had this picture of you from my 6th birthday party. I kept it hidden because it made Mom sad to see it, but I looked at it every night before bed for years. Unlike Noah, who approached their reconnection with careful pragmatism, Sophie swung between tearful nostalgia and enthusiastic plans for making up for lost time. She wanted immediate closeness, suggesting visits and shared holidays, as if 2 decades of separation could be bridged in a single leap. When Goldie asked why she hadn't looked for her sooner, her answer revealed the family mythology that had developed in her absence. I thought you were with Grandma and Grandpa, she admitted. That's what Mom told me when I was little. By the time I found out the truth in high school, no one seemed to know where you were. The reasons offered for her abandonment varied depending on who was explaining. Noah cited financial strain and their parents' mental health struggles. Sophie mentioned poor decision-making during crisis. Both acknowledged it was wrong, but framed it as a tragic mistake rather than the deliberate choice it had been. Goldie learned that her parents had told extended family that she was living with an aunt during those years, a fiction that preserved their image as caring parents who had simply been overwhelmed by circumstances. No one had questioned this narrative deeply enough to uncover the truth that she had been left alone and subsequently entered state care. Her friends were divided on how she should respond to these sudden overtures from her long-absent family. Zoe was protective, suspicious of their motives, and concerned about the emotional toll reconnection might take. They abandoned you once, she pointed out bluntly. What's to stop them from disappearing again when it gets difficult? Michael was more measured, suggesting she proceed with caution but remain open to the possibility of healing on her terms. You don't owe them forgiveness, he said, but you might find some peace in hearing them out. Her therapist helped Goldie navigate the complex emotions that surfaced with each new contact. The anger she thought she'd processed years ago returned with fresh intensity. The grief over lost years felt raw again. And underneath it all, a small, persistent voice that belonged to the 8-year-old still inside her. Why didn't they want me then? Why do they want me now? Goldie agreed to meet Noah for coffee when he came to Chicago for a work conference. Seeing him in person was surreal, like looking at a funhouse mirror version of their father. His features were familiar, yet altered by time and genetics. He had Dad's height and build, but carried himself differently, without the restless energy she remembered in their father. His children called her Aunt Goldie during a video call he initiated at the coffee shop, the title feeling both foreign and painful. These children who shared her blood but knew nothing about her, who had been told stories about an aunt who existed primarily in their father's childhood memories. Dad wants to talk to you, Noah said toward the end of their meeting, his discomfort evident in the way he fidgeted with his coffee cup. He's not well, Goldie. The doctors are talking about 6 months, maybe a year. He wants to make peace before. He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between them. The request for forgiveness from a dying man should perhaps have moved her, but it only intensified her anger. Why was she expected to provide absolution on his timeline? Where had this desire for reconciliation been during the years when she needed a father? A package arrived at her gallery the following week. The return address showed her mother's name in Ohio, sending a jolt through her at the sight of her handwriting, still recognizable after all these years. Inside was a worn teddy bear she'd thought lost forever, her childhood companion Howard, preserved all this time. There was a note. I kept him safe for you. I should have kept you safe, too. I'm so sorry, Goldie. Please call when you're ready. Love, Mom. The presumption in that signature, claiming a relationship she had forfeited 2 decades earlier, made Goldie set the note aside. But she kept Howard, placing him on a shelf in her bedroom, a tangible link to the child she had been. The formal invitation to the family reunion arrived next, an awkwardly worded card requesting her presence at a lake house in Michigan, the same place they'd vacationed as an intact family. The location was clearly chosen for its sentimental value, but the memories it evoked for Goldie were complicated, tainted by the knowledge of what came after those seemingly happy times. She stood at a crossroads, pulled between the family she had lost and the life she had built without them. They were asking her to step back into a role she had long outgrown, the youngest daughter, the baby sister, the missing piece in their family portrait. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had become someone else entirely in their absence, forged by experiences they knew nothing about and could never truly understand. The decision she made about whether to attend that reunion would define not just her relationship with her biological family moving forward, but her relationship with herself and the journey that had brought her to this point. After weeks of deliberation and intensive therapy sessions, Goldie made her decision. She would meet with her family, but not on their terms. Not at the lake house with its complicated memories. Not as part of a celebratory reunion pretending 2 decades of abandonment could be erased with cake and nostalgic reminiscing. Instead, she proposed a dinner at a neutral location, a restaurant near her gallery, where she would feel on solid ground. She wrote detailed letters to each family member beforehand, explaining exactly what had happened to her after they left. Not the sanitized version they might have imagined, but the harsh reality of foster care. The Thompsons with their black garbage bags for her belongings, Mrs. Williams with her cutting remarks, the Jacksons who used food as punishment, the constant relocations, the loss of all stability, the years of feeling unwanted and disposable. I'm not writing this to hurt you, she explained in each letter. But because if there's going to be any relationship moving forward, it needs to be based on truth, not comfortable fictions. You need to know who I became in your absence. Michael offered to accompany her to the dinner, a buffer against whatever emotional storm might await. She appreciated his support, but declined. This was something she needed to face alone, on her terms, with the strength she'd built over a lifetime of self-reliance. The evening of their meeting, Goldie arrived early, selecting a table that gave her a clear view of the entrance. She watched as they arrived together, her estranged family, instantly recognizable despite the years of separation. Dad, thinner than she remembered, hair now gray, moving with the careful steps of someone managing pain. Mom, her face lined but still beautiful, nervously adjusting her necklace as she entered. Noah hovering protectively near Dad's elbow. Sophie, eyes scanning the restaurant anxiously until they landed on her. The shock of seeing them together after 24 years was physical, a tightness in her chest that momentarily stole her breath. These people who shared her blood, who once formed the entirety of her world, were now strangers with familiar faces. Goldie stood as they approached, accepting brief, awkward hugs from each. The physical contact was both alien and achingly familiar. You look so beautiful, Mom said, tears already forming in her eyes. So grown up. That tends to happen in 20 years, Goldie replied, her voice steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. The initial conversation was strained, filled with safe topics and careful questions. How was her gallery doing? Did she enjoy living in Chicago? Was she seeing anyone special? She answered politely but briefly, watching as they exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to navigate the massive gulf between them. Dad cleared his throat during a lull in the conversation. Goldie, we owe you an apology. What happened? What we did? There's no excuse for it. But there were reasons. Mom interjected quickly. We were in such a terrible place financially, emotionally. I was suffering from depression. though I didn't recognize it then. Your father was drinking too much. We thought we were making the best decision for everyone at the time. Goldie looked at her steadily. What exactly was the best decision for me, Mom? Being left alone in an empty house at 8 years old? The table fell silent. Sophie looked down at her plate, while Noah shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dad's face flushed with shame or anger. She couldn't tell which. It wasn't supposed to be like that, he finally said. I thought your mom was taking you. She thought you were coming with me. By the time we realized what had happened, you were already in the system, and we were told it would be complicated to get you back. Complicated? Goldie repeated, the word tasting bitter. So you decided not to try because it was complicated? I couldn't handle all 3 kids alone, Dad admitted, not meeting her eyes. I was barely managing with Noah. And Sophie needed me completely, Mom added. She was so young, so confused by everything. Goldie took a deep breath, centering herself before responding. I understand that you both were struggling. I can even accept that you made decisions from a place of desperation. What I can't understand is why neither of you came back for me. Why you never called, never wrote, never tried to find out if I was okay. We did try, Mom insisted. We called the social worker a few times, but they said you were placed with a good family, that disrupting your new situation might cause more harm than good. Goldie laughed without humor. A good family? Do you want to know how many good families I lived with? She proceeded to recount her placements, naming each family and what life had been like in their homes. She recited dates, locations, specific incidents that had burned themselves into her memory. July 15, 2002, the Thompsons decided to focus on their biological children, so she was moved to the Ramirez house with 5 other foster kids. March 3, 2004. Mrs. Williams told her she was too stupid to ever amount to anything because she got a B- on a math test. November 28, 2005. The Jacksons locked the refrigerator over Thanksgiving weekend because she ate too much at the holiday meal. As she spoke, Goldie watched their faces change from defensive justification to uncomfortable recognition of the reality she had lived. This wasn't the sanitized version of foster care from heartwarming movies. This was the system as it actually existed for many children. A series of temporary homes with adults who saw you as a source of income or an obligation, rarely as a child deserving of love and stability. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, she said when she'd finished. I'm telling you because this is who I am. These experiences shaped me. If you want to know me now, you need to understand what happened to me then. She then delivered her prepared statement about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. She could forgive what happened without pretending it didn't affect her. She could move forward without erasing the past. But any relationship they built had to acknowledge the reality of those 20 years, not just sweep them under the rug. Goldie set clear boundaries for what she was willing to accept. No instant family reunions. No pretending they could pick up where they left off. No expectation that she would seamlessly integrate into family traditions she'd never been part of. Individual relationships might be possible, built slowly and with respect for who they all were now, not who they had been or who they wished she was. I won't be attending the reunion at the lake house, she concluded. That's too much, too soon, in a place that holds complicated memories for me. I'm open to getting to know each of you individually, on neutral ground, if that's something you want. But I need to be clear. I have a full life with people who have been there for me consistently. They're my family too, and they will remain my priority. Their reactions varied. Dad became defensive, initially arguing that they had suffered too, that they'd made mistakes but hadn't intended the consequences. Mom cried, repeating that she'd never stopped loving her, that she thought about her every day. Noah seemed relieved that everything was finally being spoken aloud after years of family secrets. Sophie listened intently, occasionally reaching toward her as if wanting to establish physical connection, but respecting her space. After dinner, Goldie left with her dignity intact, not seeking their approval or absolution, but standing in her truth. The frightened, abandoned child had become a woman who could face her past without being diminished by it. In the weeks that followed, she met Sophie for coffee, just the two of them. Without their parents present, Sophie spoke more freely about her own struggles growing up with a mother who battled depression and a stepfather who, while kind, had never fully understood the complex dynamics of their blended family. They began building a tentative relationship based on who they were now, not the children they had been. When the family Christmas invitation came, Goldie declined politely, suggesting instead that they continue with smaller, more manageable interactions. She wasn't ready for holiday celebrations that would inevitably highlight the years of traditions she'd missed, the inside jokes she wouldn't understand, the family photographs that didn't include her. The experience prompted a new direction in her artwork. She created a series about abandonment and healing, abstract pieces that explored the journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The exhibition received critical acclaim, with reviewers noting the raw emotional honesty and powerful resilience evident in the work. She didn't explicitly share the personal story behind the art publicly, but those who knew her understood its significance. 6 months after their dinner, her father called. His health had deteriorated further, and his tone was different, less defensive, more reflective. "I failed you," he said simply. "Not just when you were 8, but every day after that when I could have tried to find you and didn't. I can't change it, but I wanted you to know that I know it. I know what I did." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't even really forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was an acknowledgement of truth, and that meant something. Goldie has come to understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending it didn't cause harm. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of anger, not for the benefit of those who hurt you, but for your own peace. She forgave her parents, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved to be free from the weight of resentment. Family is a concept she's had to define for herself. It includes the people who share her DNA, with whom she's building careful, boundaried relationships. But it also encompasses the friends who showed up consistently, the mentors who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, the partner who understands her complex history without trying to fix or erase it. Family is who loves you, not just who shares your blood. The abandoned 8-year-old girl still lives within her. Goldie honors her courage, her resilience, her determination to survive when it seemed the whole world had turned its back on her. But she is no longer defining her. She is a part of her story, not its entirety. In her gallery office, Goldie has 2 photographs side by side. One is the picture Sophie kept all those years, showing a gap-toothed little girl with hopeful eyes. The other is a recent self-portrait, showing a woman with strength in her gaze and confidence in her stance. Both are her. Both are true. Both deserve to be seen. Have you ever had to rebuild your definition of family after loss or separation? Do you believe forgiveness is possible without forgetting? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If Goldie's story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more conversations about resilience and rebuilding. Remember that your past shapes you, but it doesn't have to define you. Thank you for listening to her journey, and we hope it brings some comfort to anyone who has ever felt abandoned or forgotten. You are not alone, and your story matters too.